I need to tell you something that happened to me last week that's going to sound impossible, but I swear on everything I hold sacred that this really happened. I was lying face down on the cold stone floor of a 14th century chapel in Malta at 3 a.m., sobbing like a broken child, when God answered the most desperate question I've ever asked him. What he showed me in that moment didn't just change my perspective, it shattered everything I thought I knew about love itself. But before I begin my story, let me know in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is. I just want to know I'm not alone in this. And if you feel moved by what you hear, consider subscribing. It helps give me the strength to speak my truth. Now let's get into my story. I'm sitting here in my hotel room in Malta. It's about 9 p.m., and we've been filming some of the most intense scenes of The Chosen's final season. The crew wrapped about an hour ago, but I can't sleep, I can't eat. I can barely form coherent thoughts because what happened to me in that ancient chapel has completely undone me in the most beautiful way possible. Let me back up and tell you how I got to that floor. We've been in Malta for 3 weeks now, using these incredible medieval locations to film Jesus' final ministry. The beauty of this place is overwhelming. Ancient stones that have witnessed centuries of prayer, chapels carved into cliffsides, the Mediterranean stretching endlessly toward the horizon. But for all its beauty, I've been struggling with something dark and heavy since we arrived. You have to understand, playing Jesus for 6 years has been the greatest privilege of my life, but it's also been the heaviest burden I've ever carried. Every day, I wake up knowing that millions of people around the world are going to watch me try to embody the Son of God. The responsibility is crushing, and lately I've been wondering if I'm even worthy of it. 3 weeks ago, before we left for Malta, I received some criticism online that really got under my skin. Someone posted a long thread about how I was too emotional in my portrayal of Jesus, how the real Jesus would have been stronger and more controlled. They said I was making Christ look weak, human, broken. The post got thousands of likes, and suddenly my mentions were flooded with people agreeing. I know I shouldn't read the comments. Dallas Jenkins has told us a million times not to engage with critics online, but I couldn't help myself. I kept scrolling, reading post after post from people questioning whether I was the right person for this role. He doesn't look like Jesus. His accent is wrong. He's too short. He cries too much. Each criticism felt like a knife in my chest, not because they hurt my pride, but because they made me question everything. What if they were right? What if I was misrepresenting the Savior of the world? What if my portrayal was actually damaging people's faith instead of building it? The doubt started small, but it grew like a cancer in my soul. During our first week of filming in Malta, I found myself second-guessing every line delivery, every emotional choice, every moment of vulnerability. Where I used to feel God's presence strongly when I stepped into character, now I felt nothing, just anxiety and self-doubt. Dallas noticed something was wrong. Elizabeth Tabish, who plays Mary Magdalene, kept asking if I was okay. George Xanthus, who plays John, offered to pray with me multiple times. But I couldn't bring myself to admit what was really happening. I was supposed to be their spiritual leader on set, the guy who played Jesus. How could I tell them that I was drowning in doubt about whether God even wanted me in this role? The breaking point came last Tuesday. We were filming the scene where Jesus weeps over Jerusalem, where he's looking at the city knowing what's coming, knowing the suffering that awaits both him and the people he loves. It's one of the most emotionally demanding scenes in the entire series, requiring me to tap into Christ's divine heartbreak over humanity's brokenness. But when Dallas called action, nothing came. I stood there looking out over the ancient stones of Malta, trying to access that deep well of compassion and sorrow that had always been there before, and I felt completely empty. Not just creatively empty, spiritually empty. It was like trying to draw water from a well that had run completely dry. Dallas called cut after about 30 seconds. He could see I wasn't there, wasn't present, wasn't connecting to anything real. The whole crew was looking at me, waiting, and I felt like a fraud. Here I was, supposed to be portraying the moment when Jesus' heart breaks for all of humanity, and I couldn't even access my own heart, let alone Christ's. "Let's take 5, Dallas said quietly, but I could see the concern in his eyes. I walked away from the set, away from the crew, away from everyone, and found myself in this small stone chapel that was built into the cliffside centuries ago. It was empty, thank God. Just me and the ancient stones and the weight of my complete spiritual bankruptcy. I sat in one of the wooden pews and tried to pray, but even prayer felt impossible. How do you talk to God when you're not even sure He wants to hear from you? How do you ask for help when you're supposed to be the one helping others find Him? The questions that had been building for weeks finally came pouring out, not in any organized way, but in this desperate, broken stream of consciousness. Why did you choose me for this role if I'm not good enough? Why did you let me get this far if I was just going to fail? Do you even care about this show, or have I been fooling myself this whole time? But underneath all of those questions was the real one, the one I'd been afraid to ask, the one that had been eating at my soul for months. God, do you actually love me? I know that sounds crazy. I'm a grown man who's been a believer most of his life. I've played Jesus for 6 years. I should know beyond any shadow of a doubt that God loves me. But in that moment, sitting in that ancient chapel, I realized that all my theological knowledge, all my years of faith, all my spiritual experiences, none of it had settled the deepest question of my heart. Because if God really loved me, why did it hurt so much to serve Him? Why was I constantly battling fear and doubt and inadequacy? Why did criticism cut so deep? Why did I feel so alone, even when surrounded by people who cared about me? If God really loved me, wouldn't following Him be easier? Wouldn't His presence be more consistent? Wouldn't I feel more secure in my calling, more confident in my purpose? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that somewhere along the way, I had started measuring God's love by my circumstances, by my feelings, by other people's approval. When things were going well, when people praised my performance, when I felt spiritually connected, I felt loved by God. But when criticism came, when doubt crept in, when I felt distant from Him, I questioned whether He really cared about me at all. I'd been treating God's love like it was conditional, like it was something I had to earn through good performance, maintain through spiritual discipline, and prove through success. But sitting there in that chapel, I realized that this wasn't love at all. It was just a cosmic performance review. As these thoughts swirled through my mind, the weight of it all became unbearable. Here I was, playing the role of unconditional love incarnate, and I didn't even believe that love was real in my own life. I was portraying Jesus' perfect love for humanity, while secretly wondering if God's love for me was dependent on how well I portrayed Him. The irony was crushing, the hypocrisy was suffocating, and the loneliness was overwhelming. That's when I slid out of the pew and onto the stone floor, not in some dramatic, theatrical way, but because my legs literally couldn't hold me up anymore. The weight of doubt, the burden of pretense, the exhaustion of trying to be worthy, it all collapsed on me at once. I found myself face down on those ancient stones, and for the first time in months, maybe years, I stopped trying to pray correctly. I stopped trying to sound spiritual or composed or faithful. I just cried. I sobbed like a child who'd lost everything that mattered. And through my tears, I asked the question that had been destroying me from the inside. God, do you really love me? Not because of what I do for you, not because I play Jesus, not because people think I'm spiritual, but just me? Do you love Jonathan, the broken, scared, inadequate man underneath all of this? The chapel was silent, except for my crying. The ancient stones offered no immediate comfort. There was no audible voice, no flash of light, no supernatural manifestation. But then something began to happen that I've never experienced before and can barely find words to describe. It started as the smallest whisper in my heart, so quiet I almost missed it. But gradually, like the sun rising slowly over the Mediterranean outside, I began to feel something that was completely foreign to my experience of God. I felt Him smiling at me, not approving of my performance, not pleased with my portrayal of His Son, not impressed with my spiritual disciplines or my ministry impact. He was smiling at me the way a father smiles at his child who's just asked the most honest question of their life. And in that smile, in that moment of divine tenderness, I knew with absolute certainty that the answer to my question was going to change everything. What happened next wasn't a vision exactly, and it wasn't an audible voice, but it was more real than anything I'd ever experienced in my life. It was like God reached into that chapel and wrapped his presence around me so completely that I couldn't tell where I ended and his love began. And then he began to show me things, not with my eyes, but with my heart, not in words, but in understanding that went deeper than language. The first thing I saw was myself as a little boy, maybe 5 years old, playing in my grandmother's backyard in New York. I was completely absorbed in building something with blocks, my tongue sticking out in concentration, my hair messy, my clothes dirty from playing outside all day. And I could feel God's delight in that little boy. Not because of anything I was accomplishing, not because I was being good or obedient or spiritual, but simply because I existed, because I was his. I saw him watching me with the same joy a parent feels watching their child discover the world. Every silly thing I did, every mistake I made, every moment of pure childhood wonder, he was there, loving every second of it. Not loving what I might become someday, not loving my potential or my future ministry, loving me right then, exactly as I was. Then I saw myself at 12, going through that awkward phase where nothing felt right in my body or my life. I was struggling in school, feeling insecure about everything, comparing myself to other kids who seemed to have it all figured out, and I felt God's heart break with compassion for that confused little boy. Not disappointment in my struggles, not impatience with my insecurities, but tender love for a child who was hurting. I saw him wanting to hold me, to tell me that I was enough, that I was loved, that all the things I was worried about didn't matter to him at all. He wasn't grading my performance or comparing me to other kids. He was just loving me through one of the hardest seasons of growing up. Then I saw myself at 18, making some really stupid decisions, rebelling against my faith, running away from everything I'd been taught about God. And what I felt from him wasn't anger or judgment or disappointment. It was grief. The grief of a father watching his beloved son choose a path that would only lead to pain. But underneath the grief was this unshakable commitment. He wasn't going anywhere. He wasn't withdrawing his love. He wasn't waiting for me to get my act together before he would love me again. He was right there, loving me through my rebellion, loving me through my mistakes, loving me even when I was rejecting him. Image after image flashed through my consciousness. Me at 25, struggling as an actor in LA, waiting tables and doing background work, wondering if I'd ever amount to anything. And God was there, not measuring my success or failure, not judging my career choices, just loving the young man who was trying so hard to find his place in the world. Me at 30, finally getting cast as Jesus, feeling so overwhelmed and unworthy, convinced I was going to mess it up. And God was there, not because I'd finally achieved something spiritual enough to earn his attention, but because he'd been orchestrating this moment for years, not for his glory through my performance, but for my good, for my growth, for my understanding of who he is. Me at 35, dealing with the pressures of success, the weight of representation, the fear of letting people down. And God was there, not adding to the pressure, not demanding perfection, but loving the man who was learning what it meant to carry something bigger than himself. Every season, every struggle, every victory, every failure, he was there. Not as a critic or a performance evaluator, but as a father who delights in his child regardless of what they accomplish or fail to accomplish. But then he showed me something that completely undid me. He showed me his perspective on the very criticism that had been destroying me for weeks. I saw those negative comments, those harsh judgments about my portrayal of Jesus, and I felt his response to them. He wasn't angry at the critics. He wasn't defensive of me. He was heartbroken for them because they were missing the whole point. They were so focused on how Jesus should look or sound or act that they were missing the heart of who he is. They were critiquing the messenger and missing the message. And then I understood something that shook me to my core. God had chosen me to play Jesus, not despite my humanity, but because of it. He wanted people to see that Jesus was fully human, that he experienced every emotion, every struggle, every moment of doubt and pain that we experience. He wanted them to see that God's love isn't distant or detached, but present and personal and deeply emotional. Every tear I'd cried on screen wasn't weakness, it was truth. Every moment of vulnerability wasn't failure, it was authenticity. Every human emotion I'd brought to the role wasn't diminishing Jesus, it was revealing him. God showed me scene after scene from the show, but from his perspective, the moment where Jesus comforts the woman caught in adultery, he showed me how that scene had helped a woman in Ohio forgive herself for her past. The scene where Jesus weeps over Lazarus, he showed me a man in Kenya who had lost his son and found comfort in knowing that Jesus understood his grief. Scene after scene, I saw how my flawed portrayal had actually been used by God to heal hearts, restore faith, and reveal his love to people who had never understood it before. The very humanity that critics were attacking was exactly what God was using to show the world his heart. Then he began to speak specific truths into my heart, not in words, but in understanding that penetrated every part of my being. Jonathan, my love for you has never been about your performance. Before you ever played Jesus, before you ever said a prayer, before you even knew I existed, I loved you completely. Not because of who you might become, but because of who you are. My son, created in my image, bought with my blood, sealed with my spirit. My love isn't something you earn or maintain or prove, it's something you receive. You've been trying so hard to be worthy of love that you've forgotten you already have it. You've been working for approval you already possess. When people criticize your portrayal of my son, they're not critiquing my choice in you. I knew exactly who you were when I called you to this role. I knew your insecurities, your struggles, your humanity. I chose you not despite these things, but because of them. The Jesus you portray, emotional, vulnerable, deeply human, that's not your interpretation, that's my revelation. I want the world to see that I didn't stay distant in my divinity. I came close in my humanity. I entered into every aspect of human experience so that no one would ever have to face their pain alone. Your tears on screen are my tears for humanity. Your compassion in character is my compassion flowing through you. Your vulnerability in the role is my heart exposed for the world to see. You're not acting, Jonathan. You're revealing. Then he showed me something that made me sob even harder. He showed me every person who had ever played Jesus throughout history. The actors in passion plays, the men in church productions, the performers in films and television shows, and I saw his love for each of them, not based on how accurately they portrayed him, not measured by their spiritual maturity or their personal holiness, but simply because they had said yes to being used by him. He showed me actors who had played Jesus and later fallen into scandal, and I felt his heartbreak for them, not his condemnation. He showed me performers who had portrayed him imperfectly, and I felt his gratitude for their willingness to try. He showed me people who had represented him in ways that others criticized, and I felt his defense of their sincere hearts. I don't need perfect actors, Jonathan. I need willing vessels. I don't need flawless performances. I need authentic hearts. The world has enough religious performance. What they need is real relationship. But then he revealed the deepest truth of all, the one that has changed everything for me. The question you asked, do I really love you, is the most important question any of my children can ask. Not because the answer is in doubt, but because the asking opens your heart to receive what has always been true. My love isn't waiting for your belief in it to become real. My love is the reality that makes everything else possible. You've been measuring my love by your circumstances, by your feelings, by other people's opinions, but my love isn't conditional on any of those things. My love is the constant that remains when everything else changes. My love is the foundation that holds when everything else shakes. When you doubt, I love you. When you fail, I love you. When you succeed, I love you. When others criticize you, I love you. When you feel close to me, I love you. When you feel distant from me, I love you. My love isn't the variable in this equation, Jonathan. My love is the constant. As these truths washed over me, I felt something breaking open in my chest. Not breaking apart, but breaking open, like a dam bursting to release waters that had been held back for too long. Years of performance-based spirituality, years of earning-focused faith, years of approval-seeking service, all of it was washing away in the flood of unconditional love. I realized that I had been trying to love God enough to deserve his love in return. I had been trying to serve him well enough to earn his approval. I had been trying to portray Jesus perfectly enough to justify his choice in me, but none of that had ever been necessary. His love wasn't a reward for good behavior. It was the gift that made good behavior possible. For the first time in my adult life, I understood what grace actually meant, not just as a theological concept, but as a living reality. Grace wasn't God choosing to overlook my flaws. Grace was God choosing to love me, not despite my flaws, but right through them, right with them, exactly as I am. Lying there on that ancient stone floor, I finally stopped trying to be worthy of God's love and simply received it. I stopped trying to earn what had already been given. I stopped working for approval I had possessed since before I was born. And in that moment of complete surrender, complete acceptance, complete rest in his love, I felt more like myself than I had ever felt in my life. Not the self I thought I should be, not the self others expected me to be, but the self God had created me to be, loved, accepted, delighted in, just as I am. I don't know how long I lay on that chapel floor. It could have been minutes or hours. Time seemed to stop in the presence of that overwhelming love. When I finally opened my eyes, the late afternoon sun was streaming through the ancient windows, painting everything in golden light. But the real transformation wasn't in the lighting around me, it was in the understanding within me. I sat up slowly, feeling like I was seeing the world through completely new eyes. The same stone walls, the same wooden pews, the same simple altar, but everything looked different because I was different. The weight that had been crushing my chest for weeks was gone. The anxiety that had been eating at my soul had vanished. The questions that had been tormenting me had been answered not with words, but with an experience of love so complete that no question could survive in its presence. My phone had been buzzing for a while. I picked it up to see several missed calls from Dallas and texts from the cast asking where I was. We had apparently missed our call time for the evening shoot. But as I read their messages, instead of panic or guilt, I felt overwhelming gratitude for these people who cared enough to worry about me. I made my way back to the set, knowing I had some explaining to do. The crew was still there, waiting, equipment ready. Dallas saw me approaching and walked over, concern written all over his face. "Jonathan, man, we were worried. You just disappeared," and he stopped mid-sentence, studying my face. "Wait, something's different. What happened to you?" I looked at this man who had believed in me enough to cast me as Jesus, who had become like a brother to me over these years, and I felt tears starting again. But these weren't tears of despair, they were tears of overwhelming gratitude. "Dallas," I said, my voice still shaky, "I think I just experienced God's love for the first time, like really experienced it." Elizabeth Tabish had walked over during our conversation, along with George Xanthus and several other cast members. They formed a small circle around us, and I could see in their faces that they knew something significant had happened. "I've been drowning in doubt for weeks," I continued, not caring that the crew could hear me, questioning whether God really wanted me in this role, whether I was worthy of portraying Jesus, whether his love for me was real. And today, in that chapel, he answered me in a way I never expected. I tried to explain what I had experienced, but the words felt so inadequate. How do you describe the feeling of being completely known and completely loved at the same time? How do you put into words the moment when you realize that everything you've been striving for you already possess? George put his hand on my shoulder. "Jonathan, I can see it in your face. Whatever happened to you, it was real." Dallas nodded. "We felt like we should wait for you. Something told us not to reschedule, that you needed to be here when you got back." And suddenly I understood why. The scene we were supposed to film that evening was Jesus' conversation with Peter after the resurrection, where he asks Peter 3 times, "Do you love me?" It was the scene where Jesus restores Peter after his denial, where he affirms Peter's calling despite his failures. But now I realized this scene wasn't just about Peter. It was about every one of us who has ever doubted God's love, ever questioned our worthiness, ever wondered if our failures disqualify us from his calling. When we finally rolled camera an hour later, something had completely changed in my approach to the character. I wasn't trying to portray Jesus anymore. I was simply allowing his love to flow through me. I wasn't acting with the fear of getting it wrong. I was responding from the security of being completely loved. In the scene, when Jesus asks Peter, "Do you love me?" I found myself speaking not just to the actor playing Peter, but to everyone who would ever watch this moment. To everyone who has ever wondered if their love for God is enough, if their faith is strong enough, if their service is worthy enough. And when Jesus says to Peter, "Feed my sheep," I felt God's heart for every broken person who thinks they're too flawed to be used by Him. His calling isn't based on our perfection, it's based on His love. He doesn't choose us because we're worthy. He makes us worthy by choosing us. When Dallas called cut after that take, there wasn't a dry eye on set. The cameraman, a guy who's not even a believer, was wiping tears from his face. Elizabeth was openly weeping. George was shaking his head in amazement. "I've never seen anything like that," Dallas said quietly. It was like watching the real conversation happen. And I realized that's exactly what it was. Through my experience in the chapel, through my encounter with God's unconditional love, the scene had become more than just a recreation of a biblical moment. It had become a present tense reality, Jesus asking each of us the same question. He asked Peter, "Do you love me?" Not to test us, but to restore us, not to condemn us, but to commission us. That night, back in my hotel room, I couldn't stop thinking about everyone who needed to hear what I had learned in that chapel. Not just believers who struggle with doubt, but people who have never experienced God's love at all. People who think Christianity is about performance and judgment. People who believe they have to earn God's approval or clean up their lives before He'll accept them. So, I'm talking to you right now, wherever you are, whatever time it is, whatever you're going through. The question I asked God in that chapel, "Do you really love me?" might be the same question that's been haunting your heart. Maybe you've been trying so hard to be good enough, spiritual enough, successful enough to deserve God's love. Maybe you've been measuring His love by your circumstances, wondering why life is hard if He really cares about you. Or maybe you've never even considered the possibility that God loves you. Maybe you think He's angry with you, disappointed in you, waiting for you to get your act together before He'll have anything to do with you. Let me tell you what I learned on that chapel floor. God's love for you isn't based on anything you've done or failed to do. It's not dependent on your behavior, your beliefs, your background, or your brokenness. His love is the foundation everything else is built on, not the reward you get for building well. If you're someone who's been following Jesus for years but struggling with doubt, I want you to know that doubt doesn't disqualify you from God's love. Your questions don't threaten Him. Your struggles don't surprise Him. Your humanity doesn't disappoint Him. He loves you not despite your doubt, but right through it. He's not waiting for you to have perfect faith. He's loving you while your faith grows. If you're someone who's been hurt by the church, criticized by Christians, made to feel like you're not good enough for God, I want you to know that those people don't represent His heart. God's love isn't religious performance, it's personal relationship. He's not looking for perfection, He's looking for connection. He doesn't want your pretense, He wants your presence. If you're someone who's never really believed in God, but something about this story has touched you, I want you to know that your curiosity is not an accident. The fact that you're even listening to this is evidence that God is pursuing you. He's not waiting for you to figure everything out before He loves you. He's loving you right now, exactly as you are, hoping you'll discover what's already true. And if you're someone who's made mistakes you think are too big for God to forgive, who's done things you're ashamed of, who believes you're too far gone for redemption, I want you to tell you what God showed me in that chapel. There is no distance too far, no sin too great, no failure too final for His love to reach. His specialty is making beautiful things from broken pieces. The love I experienced in that chapel isn't special revelation just for me. It's the same love that's available to every single person who has ever lived. God doesn't have favorites. He has children. He doesn't love some people more than others. He loves all people completely. But experiencing that love requires the same thing that unlocked it for me: honesty. You have to be willing to ask the real question, not the religious question. Not, how can I serve God better? But, does God really love me? Not, what does God want from me? But, what has God already given me? The moment you stop trying to earn love and start receiving it, everything changes. The moment you stop working for approval and start resting in acceptance, your whole relationship with God transforms. The moment you realize His love is the constant, not the variable, you find the peace your soul has been searching for. I want to pray for you right now, because that's what Jesus would do. He would speak love over your doubt, peace over your anxiety, hope over your despair. Father God, for everyone listening to this right now, I pray that you would give them their own chapel floor experience, not necessarily in a dramatic way, but in whatever way they need to understand how completely, perfectly, unconditionally you love them. For those who are doubting, reveal your love in ways they can't question. For those who are striving, help them rest in what's already theirs. For those who are broken, show them that broken hearts are your specialty. For those who are lost, help them discover they were never out of your sight. Help us all to stop trying so hard to be worthy of love we already possess. Help us to receive what you've already given. Help us to rest in who we already are to you, beloved children, chosen before the foundation of the world, accepted in the beloved, sealed with your Spirit. And for those who don't know you yet, I pray that this story would be the beginning of their own love story with you. Help them to understand that you're not waiting for them to get better before you love them. You love them so that they can get better. You're not holding their past against them. You're holding their future before them. Thank you for loving us when we couldn't love ourselves. Thank you for choosing us when we felt unchosen. Thank you for never giving up on us, even when we give up on ourselves. In Jesus' name, amen. The truth I learned in that ancient chapel in Malta is the truth that changes everything. You are loved. Not because of what you do, but because of who you are. Not because you're perfect, but because He is. Not conditionally, but completely. That's the message I was supposed to share with you. That's why God let me go through weeks of doubt and criticism and spiritual emptiness, so that when He revealed His love, I would know beyond any doubt that it wasn't based on my performance. It was based on His character. You don't have to take my word for it. Ask Him yourself. Be honest about your doubts, your fears, your questions. Stop trying to pray the right way and just talk to Him like a friend. Stop trying to be spiritual and just be real. Ask Him the question I asked, do you really love me? But be prepared. When God answers that question, it changes everything. When you truly understand how completely you are loved, you can't help but love others the same way. When you experience unconditional acceptance, you start offering it to everyone around you. That's what happened to me in that chapel, and that's what's available to you right now. God's love isn't waiting for your understanding to become real. It's real right now, whether you believe it or not. But when you do believe it, when you receive it, when you rest in it, that's when your life truly begins. You are loved, you are chosen, you are enough. Not because of anything you've done, but because of everything He's done. That's the truth that changed my life, and it's the truth that can change yours too. Thank you for letting me share my heart with you. I love you, and God loves you so much more.